Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Uncommon Advisor podcast.
So, hey, I'm Avneet.
I'm Steve Anthony.
And I'm Meehir Patel. Why don't you start with a little bit about your background and how this whole situation came to be?
Yep. So, I've got 20 years experience as a management consultant and portfolio entrepreneur. I spent a long time in corporate, and after leaving, knew I wanted to work for myself. I'd always had some property investments. We're currently sat in my coffee shop, so we built out a food business. And as a career consultant, knew I wanted to continue my career in an independent pathway. And yeah, as I was looking to partner/buy a business, I ended up speaking to Steve about a couple of years ago now. And we just found we really got on a platonic level. And 2 years later, here we are, sat in a coffee shop in Watford, recording a podcast. So totally unexpected, really. Yeah.
Stephen, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience working with Avneet, but even a little bit before that, a bit about your background and your experience and what kind of drew you to working with Avneet?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Amazing kind of opportunity to sit with you guys today. This is fantastic. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some ideas, share some thoughts. I've been in this game now for about 30 years. I live and I'm based down in South Wales. I went down there when I joined the steel industry 30 years ago. And there's almost an element of arrogance of a 20-something-year-old all those years ago when I was sitting in a steelworks management development program, and the guy at the front running the training course was earning more in a day than I was earning in a month as a manager. And I thought, I can do this. And so I quit my career in the steel industry as a manager, went self-employed, and I just started to build a consultancy business, a training business, working in all kinds of sectors. We've ended up really specializing in regional SMEs. We do a lot of work in small to medium-sized operations, and we've done a lot of work over the years in government sectors, government support agencies, and generally delivering consultancy and advice in that kind of field. It's been incredibly interesting, exciting. We've had highs, we've had lows, we've had years where we've done well, years we've not done so well. But I got to a point in my life where I started to think about, how do I take my business to the next level? And in essence, I started a conversation with different individuals, different characters, ways of how we could grow the business and develop more opportunities. And that's where you came along, in the sense of you saw something in our business and something in what we were doing at Lighthouse and at the Institute. And we've kind of carried on from there, really. And we've been working together now for, like I say, just over a year, haven't we, on all kinds of different projects. And it's coming together.
Yeah, it's really unique, right? So here, maybe if I cover a little bit about how we met,
Sure.
that will help, and how the sort of partnership's just grown organically. So I mentioned 20-year career. It's been a mixture for me of software houses, PLCs, pre-IPO, post-IPO businesses. And at one of those junctures, we worked together at a company called North Door that we both hold in high regard. And Stephen, we spoke, right? Like, my broad experience across technology, strategy, and ops, I just felt our personalities and our way of viewing the world was fairly similar, but the experiences, lived experiences, brought a lot of richness. So there was an element of that, and I felt like whilst the two of us are similar, we needed a third spoke, so to speak, who brought a different skill set. So whilst I've worked in tech, my strength is more in commercial management, and in a corporate setting has been more around oversight, but actually someone to anchor us in building a technology-led, AI-enabled consultancy. And so Meehir and I worked together at North Door. You came more from the tech side, whilst you also bring more of that human-orientated insight. So your work as an executive coach. So I think the three of us coming together, bit fortuitous, really, right? We went self-employed at different times with different ventures, but like that network and net worth effect has come together very well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of interesting because a little bit more about my background. So yeah, Avneet has said that I come from a tech background, and that's where I started in my career. I worked on IT service desks, worked in desktop support, moved on to being pre-sales for clients for managed services firms. And then I did delve into a bit of IT procurement, and then I went into doing business full time. But halfway through my IT career, I answered a bit of a calling around something slightly more involved around the human mind and the performance of one's mind, the mindset, psychology. And I studied a little bit of that, especially after some certain mental health challenges that I had. And I delved a little bit deeper into human psychology. And that's always been something that's always made me extremely curious. And I went down the path of actually becoming a coach. Initially, there's a broad term for being a coach, which was a life coach. But now I've been doing it for about 10 years now, the coaching aspect, where the IT is nearly 20 years. And specifically, I work with a human-centered approach to leadership, values-based leadership, and personal leadership. What does that mean? It means how can we become the most empowered version of ourselves here with certain frameworks and tools that I teach. And together, between myself, Avneet, and Steve, we're trying to combine all of our expertise and create a real sort of bespoke boutique offering to our customers and clients, especially with the dramatic changes that are happening in the industry right now. And I think Avneet, he was called and inspired to bring our talents together. And it's amazing that we found each other. So with these conversations, with these episodes, we're going to share a little bit more about our story and journey, but we absolutely want to make sure that we're answering certain questions around the work that we do and how we can help you out. So, but we'll talk a little bit about our CV, and then we'll go into what it means to be an advisor, and to be a special advisor and a good advisor. So, Avneet, what got you to a place of actually? We talked about briefly your journey to this point.
Sure.
Where has your career taken you where you realized that this is where you wanted to end up? If you look back to the last 10, 15 years, what was the moment that changed your direction from being an employee to becoming a business owner and a self-employed consultant?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think I'll start with there wasn't a clear plan 22 years ago. I left university just like most people, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life next. I did a degree in business and tourism. I worked at a couple of banks in sales and in customer service. I had the privilege of getting to manage people that were considerably older than me and more experienced. And that sort of led me to a path of, I definitely don't want to stay in banking for 20 years, but I want to see the world. How do I do that? And very early on, ended up joining a company called Steria, who were a consulting company. And they were really good to me. So I spent 3 years with them doing everything from full-blown management consultancy in the private sector to working on large public sector contracts before going into the Big Four. Similar to times like now, in 2008, there was a lot of financial instability, so I went into the finance sector, mix of contractor / in-house, a couple of redundancies. So I realized, like, actually, as much as there was a pathway laid out to go and get a good job, I would have to take a slightly different path where I'd run entrepreneurship alongside a career until such point that I reached not just a ceiling, but a richness of experience that would take me to the next level. And I managed to do that through partnering with multiple companies as an employee. I was head of software development at a small agency that was a startup agency. That was a fantastic experience. I learned about Agile, about software as a service. I worked with clients globally across France through to different parts of GCC, so the Middle East. Then we met at North Door. So I did 3 years at North Door. So North Door is a fascinating journey. They're an insurance-focused tech provider, but I was given the privilege of managing their acquired portfolio. So they acquired a company called Linksfield. So I dealt with, again, NHS, public sector clients, and I also worked with Medivet for 3 years. So I was very close to Medivet's then COO. So I was building a unique set of skills and experience as a consultant, right? And that led me to my final employed setting, which was at Just Eat. I stayed there 8 years because it's a highly entrepreneurial business. I did everything from running tech teams through to running and contributing to one of the largest tech mergers that's ever happened with Just Eat and Takeaway.com before finishing up in group strategy. And that is not what I was expecting my career to look like. It just happened.
Yeah.
So frankly, that's what I meant. Like, I did not enter my career with the aim of becoming self-employed. It just got to a point where actually that richness of experience needed to be deployed in a certain way where I have more flexibility. And that's where I've ended up, really.
Awesome. Avneet's putting it lightly as to why he transitioned out of corporate environments into a self-employed entrepreneur. But we'll probably cover that in a later episode, and we'll dig a little bit deeper around talking about our skeletons and things and what that influence our decisions and things like that. But yeah, look, you've had quite a broad and varied career as a consultant, which I think is amazing because it's not that you went wide, but I think working with Avneet for the past year, he's also gone very deep in the world of being a true consultant and actually not just getting the maximum amount of revenue from the client. It's been about actually making change and helping with transformation and actually seeing things through inception into mobilization. So that's awesome. And I'm very happy to be working with someone like that because it's not every day we get that opportunity, especially for myself. But look, I would love to move on to Steve. And Steve you start off as an academic. You've done your PhD and you've had quite an academic sort of approach to your career. But then, am I mistaken, or have I kind of?
It's been a part of it.
Yeah.
And I think for me,
Steve's a PhD, by the way, so he's Dr. Stephen Anthony, just so that we're clear.
I've always wanted that situation where I'm on an aeroplane and they go, "Is there a doctor in the house?" But unfortunately, I'm more likely to be able to land the plane than resuscitate the poor individual. I do have a PhD in the field that I work in. So I specialize in operational excellence, and I specialize in delivering operational excellence in what we'll say culturally challenging environments, whether that is the public sector, whether that's in an academic sector. But I've always had a very strong link in with academia from day one. And I've been very fortunate and very blessed over the years to supplement my career with a strong academic depth. But I left in my early 20s to build a consultancy business. That's what I wanted to do. It was I made a conscious decision to do that. The thing that I find very fascinating is in that kind of almost 30 years of working in this field, how it's changed over that time. And the fact that you have to learn, you have to adapt, you have to move with the times. And it is really just interesting how people use management consultants nowadays, what they need from management consultants, as per it was when I first started. It was, in the early days, it was very much one of, we just need somebody from the outside to say what we're saying already, but nobody's listening to us. They needed that kind of technical expert to come in from the outside and wear a white coat and say, this is the answer. And everybody knew the answer. They just needed an outsider to say it. And how it's moved on now to be more of a critical friend, almost more of a coach and mentor role as well, where actually you're supporting the individual and you're almost working with the individual to get an answer. It's rare nowadays that I pick up a project where we know the answer. It's more of a joint exploration to try and get there. And I'm a firm believer, if you already know the answer, you don't really need us. We are trying to work together towards finding the answer to a problem. And it lends itself beautifully to the world that I grew up in. I grew up in a problem-solving environment in my early career, and it's moved on a little bit in that sense.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Steve, right? We're talking, the title of this podcast is The Uncommon Advisor. And we've all got shared experiences. My work tends to be more in the board advisory space. Yours is more ops focused. And Meehir has both IT clients and coaching clients. So you look at that deployment, right? And it'd be great to just ask you the question about how have things changed over the last few years? What have you found that's worked really well? You mentioned your early career in strategy consulting. You moved from steelworks to strategy consulting. And what are things like now? It'd be great to hear a bit more.
Yeah, it's a fascinating world we're now living in because there is so much change happening to organizations that actually trying to keep up with that pace of change is really difficult for an organization. And actually, the solutions that we're developing now are, let's take a step back. 10 years ago, you'd go into one company, you'd fix a problem, you would copy and paste that solution into the next company. You would literally go into that next company and go, I've just done it there, I'll do it there. Yeah. And that's, unfortunately, in some ways, but also fortunately for us, because it's what makes the role interesting, is that actually that copy and paste no longer exists. And genuinely, you're looking now at unique solutions to problems. And that's probably the biggest change. Yes, there's so many kind of environmental pressures that are exerting on organizations nowadays. There are so many different forces at play. But I think gone are the days we can copy and paste a solution. I think that's the interesting thing for me.
No, absolutely. And I think that's probably one of the sort of major reasons why we've combined forces and why you wanted to create a partnership. Because one, we're realizing you can't have a cookie cutter approach to anything really, especially when it comes to management consulting, being an advisor in any shape or form. But also, I think you want to be very specific in how you want to support people, and sometimes you don't have all the skill sets just under just one person can't be everything to everyone. And I think with our breadth of experience, hopefully, we can support our customers and clients with a wide variety with solutions to problems that they may have. So that kind of leads us nicely to the next part of the conversation. But is there something you wanted to share, Steve?
No, good.
Yeah.
I think that there's a couple bits I'd like to share. So I think, look, there are definitely going to be questions and answers come out of this around what makes a good advisor. But I'd like to just talk a little bit about why we've partnered, right? So there's that element of the journey of all of us and how we met. But there's also that realization of, in my last role, it was very cross-functional. I sat in a strategy team across like global functions. And having been an external consultant, granted in an employed setting, I always had that benefit of working with people that had deep functional knowledge. And both of you have that. So you're level-headed enough, but you both have that. So Steve, your years of experience across both academia and operational excellence. Meehir, yours in the technology space, and then mine more in setting up projects and like defining strategy. So you need to have that level of expertise. We're also, it's not just the three of us here, is it? Like we've got additional support and they bring different profiles, but we've also very intentionally utilized the 20 plus years of experience each of us has, plus our extended team has, to really try and create a bespoke, principle-led advisory firm. We're not a big four consultancy that's looking for high rates through margin uplift, right? We're genuinely bringing years of expertise to the fore and have had the training ground, whether that's been an employed setting or a self-employed setting, to create value for our customers. And that's the interesting part, the client part. Since I've gone independent, I've got multiple different clients, from private equity through to in the food space, and our joint efforts now on public sector. And the work is so broad, but it retains that common aspect of actually it perhaps any one of our personal capability, right? The uniqueness of bringing it, almost that Venn diagram of COO type lens from you, Steve, CTO lens / CHRO lens from you, and mine's more in that CEO like mobilization type lens. It's taken some time to realize that, but I think that's where we've got to.
Yeah.
No, it's actually really interesting in the fact that opposites genuinely do attract, don't they? In the sense of we're three very different individuals, three very different characters, three very different life experiences to this date, but huge overlap as well in some of the more, shall we say, kind of softer areas of kind of outlook and mindset and what we're trying to do and what we perceive as value as well, which is the other side of things. There's so many different ways you can take the question about this kind of special advisor in the sense of the relationship that we have with our clients and who we're working with and trying to build that. For me, having been in the game for a long time, what you end up doing is building these really strong relationships. But I was a young lad when I started. So I was in my 20s and I was building relationships with managers and engineers who were in their 30s and 40s. Now I'm sitting here in my 50s and those guys have retired. Yeah. And the interesting thing for us is actually, Steve, who are the relationships you've got, what you're building now, or what have you been building over the last 10 years? Because actually those initial relationships are naturally coming to an end as those guys retire and fall off. So it is really interesting from a point of view of looking at it over a long period of time, the relationships you build and how you sustain those relationships and how those relationships sustain us as well. can be quite a lonely experience running your own kind of consultancy business. It can be quite a challenging experience. So to have this kind of opportunity to bring like minds together and to build relationships, for me, that's a big part of this.
Said Steve, I think even for me running, I've been a one-man band both in the IT sort of managed services sector, but also as a coach and doing it on my own. I've done some collaborative work, but I've done it remotely with teams abroad in America and things like that, the coaching aspect of things. But even then, it doesn't beat actually working with people physically, even though we are, because Steve's all based all the way in Wales and myself and Avneet are based in between Watford and myself in Harrow, North West London. So all of this kind of adds to the experience of not just us becoming an effective team, but also making sure that our culture that we're creating, knowing that we've had careers way before us, is really rich and it's very, as you said, Steve, really grounded in some really strong shared values. And I think that's why, really the reason why this all works, let alone our expertise, but the fact that we kind of have similar outlooks and we have shared values is a big part of why this partnership exists. So saying that, let's answer the question. Like, I think part of what I've just said, I think does answer some of the question as to what makes a good advisor. But I do want to go a little bit deep into sort of asking questions both to Steve and Avneet, and I'll probably have some perspectives on this as well. Let's kind of say what makes us a good advisor. What the questions we really want to answer and what clients could be asking is, what are we willing to do that other advisors are not really willing to do, or either don't have the expertise or the awareness, or generally all around selfishness that might exist in the industry? Why are we different, and what makes us a really good choice for our clients?
Shall I
Yeah,
kind of kick
go
us
ahead,
off on that? Because
Steve, yeah.
I think there's almost an element of I want to take a slight step
Step
back
back,
for a
yeah.
second and then
Yeah.
come forward. Because I think there's something about what people expect from advisors, and almost the technical expertise is a given nowadays.
Yeah.
You can't come to the table and go, I'm technically better, because actually that's a given. I think there's something that actually around the relationship that you're trying to build with your clients,
Correct,
that actually
yeah.
clients are looking now more for that, like I said earlier, that critical friend, because the technical skills are a given. There was a book written many years ago called The Seven C's of Consulting.
Yeah.
And the working assumption here is that that's a given. You know,
Yeah.
that, and I can't even remember what the seven are, but that is the kind of, but in essence, I think there is something about what makes people special, what makes consultants special, why is one boutique better than a different consultancy, I think will boil down to that certain level of intimacy is between
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
supplier and the consumer of
Yeah.
that service and that transaction that we're building. That was all I wanted to add.
No.
So I think you hit nail on the head, Steve. If I look back at the junior elements of my career or the mid elements of my career, and it's another reason why I've gone self-employed, is you own that client relationship. So as you say, you preloaded with a certain set of expertise, and now at the more principal / top end of my career, I've got a network of very dependable people that I can reach out to if I don't have the skill in a certain area. So I have a pre-vetted network, but it's that, right? It's actually saying, I'm coming in here to help you solve a problem. I am not coming in here to sit on your P&L and your books as an expensive consultant with a presentation. There is a space for large consultancies and large contracts. We're not that. In my employed career / even contract career as a self-employed consultant, I've unwound a lot of those large enterprise type activities and expensive consultant type mindsets. So it's about a level of effectiveness. It's about a level of trust. It's also, quite frankly, also about having a shared outcome, right? That is really why I felt like this team could come together and deliver like outsized value, really, honestly speaking. So we talk a bit about my background's portfolio entrepreneur. I've got property portfolio. We're sat here at my coffee shop. I've got an award-winning food business. But consulting is a very interesting space because you're being engaged to help a business fix a predefined set of, and often just correcting myself as I'm speaking, predefined set of outcomes, but there may be no definition around what drives those outcomes. How do we get there? You're basically bringing value through being independent and being sat on the outside. But I think the classic challenge with consulting has always been, oh, you're just going to throw a deck at me and then you're going to load in a project. That's the difficulty with the industry. The beauty of the industry is if you get it right, you're lean, you're agile, you've got the right expertise and the right relationship with your client, then you can really solve some very interesting problems together and enable your client to move forward without you. That's the interesting bit.
The other interesting side to it is we're in different companies every day.
Yes.
So there is always that. You go to some organizations and the first thing they'll say to you is, Steve, we're special. And to a certain degree they are.
Of course. Yeah.
To a certain degree they are. But one of the beauties of working in this type of relationship and in this type of world is the diversity of clients that we work with, whether they're traditional manufacturing companies, whether they're public sector bodies. And I was trying to rack my brains the other day of an industry I've not worked in 30 years. And I was sitting there and somebody said, I bet you've not worked in an abattoir. And I went, no, I think I did about 20 years ago. And I think I've not done a leisure centre yet. So if there's anybody working in a leisure centre, I'd love that, because that's one sector. But just having that diversity and breadth of experience brings real value to the relationships that we're trying to build with our clients, and some of that kind of shared value and shared benefit that we can bring across the table.
Yeah, said Steve, and also Avneet. I wanted to speak to both what you guys have just said. I think the shared value aspect is not just between us three and the other people that we have on our team. It also kind of extends to the clients we want to work with. Now, something that I've kind of come to learn is traditionally you would have a niche and you kind of go down that route and you kind of work with a very specific set of people. But I think that's a little bit conventional. And I think what we're really looking for is, people and relationships where you actually have shared business values around how we want to kind of offer them support and solutions. And something Avneet said, we want to support you in mobilization. But I think it's also very important to say that, I think, and you guys correct me because you guys have had a much more extensive career and probably a much 30,000 foot view perspective. But I would say, I think a lot of consultancy engagements are about saving the client from themselves. And I don't think that's true across the board, but especially in certain management consultancies, especially with the Big Four and all that sort of stuff, they kind of hire someone to solve their problems that they created. And that might work to a certain degree, but you kind of realize that the engagement is actually a very surface level engagement, and you have to kind of get down to a really deep root cause as to why certain things are the way they are. And I think what we're saying is that we're willing to say no to things a little bit more in the beginning rather than saying we're gonna say yes to everything. And I think that's what kind of differentiates us. And if we have an engagement, we're very targeted in how we're gonna incrementally implement ourselves within the business if we are to be in an engagement. Do you guys agree with what I'm saying?
Yes, I would agree. Certainly in my experience over the last 3 decades, I've seen examples of where we've gone in and unfortunately the company has caused the situation they're in. It's not an external force that has come to the table. What I would say though is the areas where we've had the biggest wins, the areas where we've had the biggest cultural impact, the biggest where we've made maybe the biggest financial impact, has been with organizations that truly want to be there and want to work with us and want to kind of be successful, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you get brought in on a project and it's somebody's pet project on the board, or it doesn't have complete buy-in from the organization, and you're fighting the whole hierarchy of the organization to kind of deliver the change. And that's difficult. It's difficult to win in those situations. But if you can find an organization that wants you, that needs you, that actually sees the value in what you're offering, suddenly the world becomes your oyster. Certainly as an advisor, that actually you almost can't do anything wrong in that situation, because actually they really want it to work. They really want it to be a success. The challenge we've often found is where we come in the hierarchy, because if you can imagine, the lower down you are in the organization, the more weight resistance to change can be brought to bear on you. If you're quite low down on that kind of hierarchy, there's a lot of senior managers, a lot of senior experience can prevent you from delivering change and improving the situation. Whereas if you can come in higher, and the higher you can get, actually the less weight that can be brought to bear to resist change. And in many ways, for us, if we can work with senior executive teams who want us in the room, it's an easy win. It's an easy job.
And I think so that I think all of that is valid, right? It's also driven by the type of engagement, the type of consulting that you're doing. So I do some pieces for private equity / knowledge networks that are more around, we need this piece of knowledge for an investment or piece of due diligence. That's quite transactionary, right? It's quite a different type of consulting to the mentoring I do for startups. So I've got couple of startups of my own, as I've mentioned, in the food space and the property space. And that's more about what's your experience of entrepreneurship. But then when you start to go to more structured engagements with potentially larger teams, whether that's enterprise, SME, it absolutely is about who is driving that engagement. What is it, function led? Does it have the buy-in of the board or the ET or even the stakeholders that are going to be affected by that project? And I absolutely agree. The last engagement I did, there was just enough, there was plenty of buy-in on, and it came down from the CEO of that organization, led by the functional leaders who I partnered with. It was very incisive, but the level of buy-in across that organization to get this piece of work done was fantastic. And yes, I had someone helping me navigate the organization. But as you say, Steve, as an advisor, you have two roles to play. One is driving the agreed outcome. But I also, think there is a place for, I keep saying there's a place for larger consultancies, and that's in the project delivery and often in unwrapping complex issues that sit within that project. But that's not what we're about, right? I am now more and more, I have come from a project delivery background, but I'm more and more sat in the strategy space, like actually going, how do we realize the strategy? What are the KPIs behind it? How do we realize your growth? What pivots do we need to make? But there's this concept that keeps coming out now, which businesses are just becoming more and more agile. And to drive agility, you need to have both a richness of experience and, as you said, Steve, a level of buy-in and drive from within that organization to deliver real value.
Awesome. So it's something, I'm just looking at the podcast notes, and I want to ask both of you this question because we may be saying the same thing, but I think that both of their perspectives are really validated, and I'll share something at the end there. Yeah. We say here, we mobilize you, but we don't replace you. When we say that, and I think that's what we agreed when we were thinking about our business vision, like we didn't want to be doing a certain type of execution and delivery for the client. We're really saying we just want to be we want to be in the advisory position. We're very specific around that. But Steve, like, what does that, with your background and with your vast experience, what does it mean to you for when we say we want to mobilize you, we want to get you ready, but we don't actually replace you and be your replacements?
Yeah, it's a really interesting challenge that I think independent especially, but small consultancies face, because you want your client to be self-sufficient at the end of the intervention, but you enjoy the paycheck that they give you every month. And so there is something there about how do you do that kind of capability, that skills transfer, that kind of knowledge transfer, and empower them and enable them. So we're not replacing, we're not a resource in that sense. How do you give them that maturity? How do they grow in that particular way? Versus this idea of actually wanting to stay with that client for as long as possible. And there is a challenge there where you start doing, in the early interventions, it's very intense. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot of work. And I've literally been working with a client where I'm based in South Wales now for the last 10 years. And for the last 10 years, we've been going in there and we've been slowly, and it is literally taking 10 years, to almost start to separate that relationship where they are now in a position of being able to do this work themselves. And actually, it's taken time. Now, partly it's because of what they wanted from the intervention and from the consultancy support and the advisory help that we've been giving them, but also a realization from my side of things of going, look, guys, you have reached a level of maturity here where the role of the advisor has changed from
Yeah.
a doer
Yeah.
to a genuine critical friend. And I think actually that will differ from different organizations. It might be 5 minutes for one company, it might be 10 years for another. But there is a journey, if you like, that those organizations have to go on themselves, and I think we are on that journey. And the only other thing I say before I would hand over regarding this idea of, if you like, not replacing resource or anything like that, our role is to add value ultimately at the end of the day. It's not about reducing or helping organizations cut costs by bringing us in. Yes, there will be financial implications, financial savings, lots of projects do that. But our primary role really has always been, how do we add value? Whether that's improving competitive advantage, whether that's opening up new markets, whether that's finding new investment opportunities, whether that's bringing new technology to market, it's always been a positive story. It's not about replacing something. The two things that I would come.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to a shared set of outcomes, right, Steve? A lot of my recent work has been in private sector and highly agile businesses that, quite frankly, want quite an aggressive realization of shared outcomes that have been agreed on. And what I say to them is, yes, you can have that, but my role is to help you achieve the definition of what you should do, not just do it for you. And that is a very important realization. Last role in corporate, when I was sat in a function, I ran teams and the teams did the delivery. And that's the point here, which is if you have an external perspective, we all know budgets are a bit tighter than they have been. There's more pressure on realizing outcomes faster. And it's about doing that from the outside. So there's that element of you're not engaging in the politics of the organization, or if you have to navigate them, it's done with the right level of sensitivity. But being on the outside as an independent, you can enable the organization to realize its blind spot. So that's very critical, right? And then there's a second element of, I keep going back to the type of engagement. So the public sector engagements we've won, they're quite varied. So some are framework agreements where it's more about driving growth through innovation and new startups versus defined projects. And those defined projects are maybe a transformation driven by the CEO office, but it has a functional or set of functional impacts. But we're still looking to then hand off at a defined point and say, actually, we're not here. So your point about the paycheck, right? Yes, okay, consultancy is lucrative. There's no denying that, but there's also an element of it's quite uncertain and it's also very project driven. And if you're only as good as the outcomes that you agree and the structure that you agree, and that's why I felt like this partnership works very well, right? Like I've come from that world of defining what a good set of project outcomes looks like, how much is just enough so the organization can stand up on its own 2 feet, to your point of maturity. What does a good design look like? The early days of Just Eat, for example, versus the corporate days, very different. A lot more navigation required, lot larger footprint of project impact versus doing small POCs in the early days of the tech portion of my time there. But it's actually saying what is correct for this organization. How do we co-design it in a way where you're going to realize the maximum value for your budget? And also, do you really need us like you think you need us? You may need us for, as I said, like a due diligence piece or driving a mobilization of X thing, but you definitely don't need us for execution. Because if we're doing that, then you're spending a lot of money where perhaps your budget is better deployed elsewhere. So it's giving that level of advice in a way where you can continue to both receive good engagements, but also then hold that real sense of pride on both sides that you've both got shared value, whether that's through payment or whether that's through on the company side, like realization of value through a new product to market or a change in strategy or whatever it may be.
Awesome stuff. What I'm hearing is ultimately, if we had to have a bit of a philosophical take on what we just talked about, to me, it really sounds like we're trying to really, anyone we work with, we want to deliver value and we truly want to empower them in the best way possible, in whatever way that's true for them in terms of the engagement that we have with them and the intervention that we take part in. So that kind of leads nicely to where I want to go next. And why now? Like, why are we doing this together? And I want us to all answer that question, but also talk a little bit more about where we see ourselves in 3 years' time. Yeah. What kind of problems are we helping our clients with? What type of leaders are we working with? Let's talk a little bit more about that. Curious to know kind of just one to share between ourselves, just live, because we do have these conversations, but sometimes we're growing all the time. So it'd be great to kind of hear where everyone's at the moment. So Steve, why don't you kick us off?
Yes, that was a question that wasn't on the script, wasn't it?
It is, but I kind of just expanded it.
No, it's a fantastic question. Thank you, Meehir. I appreciate that. It's a difficult one in the sense of I'm at that point where I'm looking for interesting things. So in the early days of our career, it was about the most lucrative, and it was all very much financially driven. And that's fine. Everybody goes through that phase. I'm at that proportion of my life and my career where I want to start almost choosing interventions, opportunities that don't just reward the client, but also reward me on a level more than just a financial level. So there is something there about wanting to take on things that are interesting, things that are challenging, things that are going to get me to think a little bit. So that would be an honest, if you like, answer to that first question. And we can always edit that out. The kind of follow-up thing in the sense of where do I see things going in the future? The interesting thing for me is I think people are a little bit off kilter at the moment, a little bit unsure, a little bit about what's around the corner. Now, whether that's technology, and I know we've got a future discussion planned around, for example, AI, and there's an element of why do I need an advisor if I can just type my question into Google?
Yeah.
So there is a big challenge coming there. But actually, not just technology, but politically, environmentally, the things we see on the news every day, you almost get a feeling that actually people are scanning the environment more than they've ever scanned the environment. That would be the first thing I would say. We have access to more information now than we ever had as managers and as leaders. And actually, we are more aware. And I think the interesting thing is how people are reacting to that. And a lot of the leaders and a lot of the managers that I've been interacting with over just the last few months have almost been a little bit, scared is too strong a word, a little bit cautious, a little bit unsure. For the first time, these are highly successful individuals that have made a name for themselves in their chosen industries, who are well respected in their fields, suddenly feeling a little uneasy, a little unsure. And I think the last thing that I need to do in an intervention and into a consultancy type role is add fuel to that fire, if that makes sense. So when we're coming to the table, we're coming there almost, like I said a couple of times on this podcast, a critical friend, but coming at it from a point of view of helping and supporting that individual. Rather than go back 10 years, it was about turning the tables upside down. It was kind of, it was about going into organizations and turning the whole thing upside down, and that's how you drove change. And that was brilliant. Now I get the feeling, because of that unease and uncertainty and a little bit of uncomfortableness that people are feeling from all that kind of stimulus and all that input, I think actually now it's less about turning those tables upside down and more about not adding to the concerns, the fuel to the fire, the environmental inputs, but actually being more reassuring, being more supportive, more about delivering those shared values, those shared benefits, those, if you like, driving the business forward in so much more of a positive way. So that would be kind of some of the conversations I've been having over the last few months with some leaders and some managers. They would never admit it, but you can sense it. Having known them for so long, you look at them and go, this has knocked you back a bit. And actually, it's not my job to make that worse. It's my job to make that better.
Yeah, it just reminds me of a story when I worked in insurance as a consultant. Large insurer outsourced to a couple of IT companies, brought in the firm I was working for. And my role was to assess the outsource, assess how change was running, how run was running from a tech perspective, and then actually reporting that to the CIO. And one of the recommendations, whilst the head of IT was in the room, was fire the head of IT. But that whole process took months. And now you're talking weeks because the level of, I keep going back to the word agility, the level, so you're absolutely right. There's a heightened level of uncertainty. I feel that in my property business. I feel it in the food business. There's more of a want for immediate recognition of either value or a need for increased assurance through, as you say, quieting down the noise whilst providing assurance around the direction. No one can change the uncertainty in the environment, but what you can do is be more informed about either different approaches, why the path option A, option B, option C that you've laid out as a consultant, why they're suitable, why you're recommending them, and then which one is appropriate. Actually, that's where you're empowering the organization. And that is very hard to do when you're in an organization. It's much easier to do when you're diagnosing from outside. But I definitely agree, right? Like speed, intentionality. We go back to that thing of buy-in from the client and empowerment to deliver that value. And not all interventions are short. Some of them are short. Some of these projects are designed longer, but then they're phased with more of an iteration. And at the end of the iteration, it's almost like you've got a series of short interventions that form a larger project. So things are changing. Relationship, it's becoming more of a omnidirectional impact that you're having on a business, and also accepting that the scope that you have agreed, it may flex as you go through an engagement, but it's not a whole scope change. We've all been part of those projects where things change seismically in the business due to X, Y, or Z factor. But actually, as a consultant, like continuing to deliver to I keep going back to this word of like outcomes. That may be KPIs, it may be a report, it may be a shared set of knowledge, right? Then that will naturally get you to a point where hopefully in the future, yes, they will need advisors, but the work becomes more mature and more, you just end up with a better sense of actually where you're headed as an organization. That's really the value that we can deliver as advisors.
Yeah, said both of you. I think just to kind of like bring it kind of full circle, like Avneet at the start of the conversation, no, Avneet, Steve actually said this at the start of the conversation, where traditionally it's been very cookie cutter with management consulting engagements, and really what we're saying is what we truly want to do is create, it's a bespoke boutique firm, and we want bespoke consultancy engagement. So we don't have a one size fit all approach, not because that differentiates us, but it actually is because what you said, Steve, earlier just now, where people are apprehensive. They're a little bit taken aback by the level of uncertainty that we're facing in the world. And I think having a much more iterative and incremental approach to consultancy is actually beneficial both for us and our clients, because that way we can always be coming back to, is this bringing value? And I think it's much easier to do when you have an incremental and iterative approach, whilst always, I think I love what you're saying when you're defining us as a critical friend. I think that's really, that is a value that we want to embody when we're building these relationships and doing delivery and executing certain things. So absolutely, I think that's really where we want to kind of be heading towards, and that's really a strong part of our foundation. Look, I think this is drawing to a final sort of closing for this episode. Is there any sort of final sort of things that you guys want to share about what we've talked about today, and anything that could be useful for anyone listening right now?
Grant, I'll kick off since I'm holding the mic. I think thinking of the title and thinking about this idea of advisors, I think there is still a role for advisors. I think as we move into this world, which has a certain amount of uncertainty in it, advisors have a different role to play than what they did many years ago. I think there's an opportunity for people that are interested in getting involved in this line of work to actually think about how over the years the role of consultants and advisors has changed, and the fact that we need to be adaptable, and we as advisors and consultants need to be flexible and agile, to use that term. And I think you have to bear in mind that actually those technical expertises, like I said earlier, are a given. And it's what do you bring to the table beyond that? And I think if we can recognize the need of our clients and our consumers and our customers and our stakeholders, if we can really understand what they value, I think we have an opportunity to adapt our approach, our style, to build those relationships, to be that critical friend, to support them in their agility and dealing with the world that they find themselves in today. And whether you're a large corporation, a mid-sized organization, or a small boutique little industry, little organization, I think there is a strong role need for advisors, and I think there will always be. I think there will always be. It'll be interesting to see how that role evolves over the next 30 years. I mean, I've seen it in the last 30 years. Be interesting to see where it goes next.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, right, just to echo that, Steve, we talked a little bit about AI and technology-enabled change. I think that will always be there, and the pace of it's getting faster. But that human component of really applying knowledge, shared business value, creating both a sense of a vision and an outcome, that can be done on a set of slides through AI, but it's hugely disconnected without conversation and without debate and without the right level of rigor. And that is where the advisors come in, right? It's about, are you really sure you want to do this thing? Because if you do this thing, this could be the outcome. And yes, you can get that from AI, but the conversation around it and the actual net realization of the risks you are taking and the outcomes you may achieve, that needs to be balanced, right? And that is something, as you say, it crosses whether you're a startup through to enterprise. And really, that's what we're here for, right? Our experience crosses multiple industries. It goes from startup through to enterprise. And we've got both the chops and the scars to show for all of that, I think. Yeah, so there's my piece.
No, awesome stuff, guys. Look, I want to kind of close on this note. I think our partnership is, we're definitely saying that we can absolutely support you and serve you and bring value to you. But equally, I think we're just as much as humbled by everyone else that we're learning at the same time, but we're making it part of our sort of approach to these things as advisors to make sure we're on top of what's happening in industry, what's happening in terms of what is best for our clients all the time. That's always kind of at the forefront of our mind. So saying that, we mentioned the acronym a couple of times now, more than a couple of times, AI, and that's probably going to be where we talk about our next episode, what we talk about in our next episode. So make sure you tune in for that. But thank you guys for tuning in today. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Cheers.